Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of r/ProRevenge. In today's episode, construction revenge 10 years in making and why I will never have another business partner. After that, when enough is enough, people lose jobs and go to prison. Finally, CEO voids a verbal agreement, enjoy the new union. Before we get into today's episode, remember to subscribe so you never miss another episode of r/ProRevenge. Construction revenge 10 years in making and why I will never have another business partner. A little over 10 years ago, when I was a young carpenter, I met a guy who I'll call Chad, because frick Chad. Chad was a new hire by the company I was working for, and became my helper. We got along famously even though he was 10 years older than me. He didn't mind working under a 23-year-old carpenter as an apprentice. Chad and I had worked together for 6 months when he brought up the idea of starting a business together. He figured between the two of us, we could easily run a crew and build houses. After talking it over with my pregnant girlfriend, now wife, we decided that it would be better for me to be an employee, but still a 50% partner for tax reasons and insurance purposes. Chad said that was fine with him. So we started laying out who was take care certain aspects of the business. Chad was to be the guide to find work, as I look, and still do, way younger than I am, and it doesn't instill a lot of confidence in the client to think their framer is 16. Chad was also to take care of payroll, insurance, and any other financial factions. My duties were simple. Staff and run the crew, and keep on budget, something that came easy to me. I was to be paid an hourly wage, as well as 50% of profit after all business expenses. I never took my profit draw, as I rolled it back into growing the company. Things were great for about 6 months. The crew was working well together. We had a few houses under our belts, and a contract for a 10,000 square foot custom house with multiple outbuildings. Things were great. So Chad has never built a foundation, and we usually hired a crew to put the foundation in for us. As like I said, Chad has never built one, and I personally hate concrete work. We couldn't get our normal foundation crew in, so I stepped up and said frick it, I'll do it myself. The company we were building for is one of the best custom home builders around, and doing a good job on this house could mean that we wouldn't have to pound the pavement looking for work. Work would be given to us. Perfect arrangement. Until it wasn't. Chad started spending money like it was going out of style. He sold his 2500 Chevy pickup and bought a new Jeep Wrangler. He had the Jeep for about a month before he sunk it in water while 4x4ing, and it caught on fire mysteriously a few days after. He received the insurance payout and bought a brand new Dodge 2500 Power Wagon, which he, in short order, sunk in water within a few weeks. I never noticed the red flags as Chad and I rarely spoke face to face. He was the business side, I was the get it done side. I finished the foundation and picked up the check from the builder. The builder said that we overbilled him by 25%, but he was happy with the work I done, but not to overbill again, as he doesn't like overpaying, as there may not be any money left at the end of the build. I apologized and asked him to cancel the check and issue one for the work actually completed. He agreed to and said, I'm so happy to have honest people working for me. I usually don't pick up the checks, nor did I ever really look at the books, as it wasn't in the scope of my responsibilities. This prompted me to log onto our corporate account and see that we are so far in the red that we couldn't afford to buy a red pen, let alone cover payroll. I showed up at Chad's house and tore a strip off of him. He apologized and promised to top up the account with his personal profits draw money. I go into work Monday to find the locks on our tool bin had been changed, my name removed from all accounts, and a letter taped to the tool bin stating I was dismissed from my duties for an undisclosed reason. I was freaking furious. I was not aware that as a business partner I could be fired. I found another job quite quickly and tried my best to put it behind me. That's when I found out where the money was going, and that Chad had been slandering my name around town, blaming me for the missing money, as well as a bunch of egregious statements about my work ethic, trade skills, mental stability, and home life. Now, I fastidiously tracked all of our interactions with a simple journal and had backups of the transactions of our business account. I also happen to have backups of all our texts, voicemails, and pictures of everything. This is the revenge part. I took the evidence to my father's lawyer Rip, friend, who started a fraud, embezzlement investigation through the CRA, Canadian Revenue Agency, Canada's IRS, and called the insurance provider to make sure they were being paid. They had never received anything. I called the builder whom we were building for and explained what was happening. He told me that Chad had essentially stolen around $30,000 for payment of work not completed, and had broken into their office and stolen another $15,000, replacement value of equipment and tools. I did what anyone would do. I called the police. Police said they couldn't help me and said it was a civil case. And the builder said he wasn't going to sue, as Chad had no money, and it wasn't worth the headache. So I called his auto insurance company, sent them all the pictures of his sunk vehicles, texts about them, and a short video he sent of him lighting the Jeep on fire. Insurance company filed charges against Chad, and won. Chad is on the hook for around $130,000. I've spent the last 9.5 years telling anyone who'll listen about Chad, and have had him essentially blackballed from the carpentry industry around here, because it's not slander if it's true. I have also looked up his criminal history, as it is public domain every 3 months or so, and make a point of showing up at his court proceedings, or offering myself as a character reference for the Crown prosecution. So I've gone out of my way to remind Chad that he can't frick me over without repercussions. And no, this doesn't end here. Years have passed, and I am still pissed off. I receive a call from a guy offering me a job. It was the builder that Chad screwed over, not remembering that we know each other. After I explained who I was, and this bridge is burnt due to Chad, he still offers me the job. Medical, dental, company van, gas card, corporate credit card. I accept his offer. First order of business, finds another way to frick with Chad. Through the grapevine I find where Chad is living and working. New boss calls the company Chad is working for, and Chad is summarily fired. I get in touch with Chad's landlord, explain how he operates, and Chad is evicted for unpaid rent. He was apparently a couple months behind. I also managed to get his girlfriend's phone number, call her and explain what this guy does to people, and his extensive criminal history, including, but no limited to fraud, identity theft, insurance fraud, his many assaults, and his wanted picture published in the paper. Turns out she is owner of his truck, primary operator, but he pays the insurance. He cannot insure a vehicle until he pays off what he owes for the fraud. She asks me what she should do. I say that I'll take care of it. I call the insurance provider, explain what is going on, for them to tell me he doesn't even have a license anymore. They void the insurance on his girlfriend's truck after speaking to her, and set up a sting with the police. I personally get to be involved as I knew what was going on. So I sit and wait for the day it goes down. I roll up behind the unmarked police cruiser, and quickly explain who I am and what my plans are. The police are thinking that they are just waiting to pull him over for driving without a license, and no insurance. I said I'm going to cowl him immediately as soon as I see him. So he comes cruising out, and I make the call. He actually picked up the phone to call me a bunch of names, and the N-word. I am as white as the fresh fallen snow, and promptly gets pulled over. Police issue a ticket for reckless driving, no seatbelt, no license, using a handheld device. During this the girlfriend pulls up, and proceeds to give consent to search her truck. In the truck they find multiple IDs, stolen credit cards, a couple ATM skimmer machines, and a fake police badge. He was arrested on the spot. Revenge over, right? Nope. Police then asked to search the residence he was living at. He moved into the girlfriend's house after I had him evicted from his own place. In the garage they find a vast collection of stolen tools, a lot of which belonged to the builder I was working for, from when he broke into their office, and they were all stupidly still labeled with the company's inventory control stickers. This brought on more charges, and he was remanded to police custody until his trial date. Well, justice is sometimes slow here in Canada, and his trial date was at the time 17 months into the future. Well, yesterday was his trial date, so my boss, who Chad ripped off, Chad's ex-girlfriend, and I attend the hearing, just to see the man squirm. His judgment was 80 years in jail, after being granted time and a half for time served, a $100,000 fine, 1,000 hours community services after release, and no possibility of parole. I got to watch him be taken away in chains twice. Never underestimate the fury of a quiet man. And frick Chad. When enough is enough, people lose jobs and go to prison. Background. This pro-revenge took place when I was in high school in the mid-2000s, a time in my country when there was much public outcry over bullying, hazing in boarding schools. A couple of students in different schools had died from injuries resulting from bullying. Other schools were rioting and burning it. They were under increased scrutiny. It was a whole thing. Personally, my life in high school was not fun. I was a fat boy with very low self-esteem going into my first year. The bullying I experienced quickly led to a depression. I was prone to self-harm and recklessness and a bit of suicidal ideation. The thing that made high school particularly nightmarish though was the axial abuse. Low-key comments about my sexuality from this group of about 5 boys in 4th form. They called me and my best friends gay. The social stigma associated with homosexuality here is really extreme. These boys would stalk and terrorize me. They left threatening notes under my sheets. We're going to frick you up for being a freaking gay. We're going to freaking rape you, etc. So I had only one close friend who knew what was going on. Ironically, after an entire term of convincing everyone that I was gay, this same group began actually abusing me. I'll spare you the details, but my first year in high school was the worst time of my life. But you're not here for my sad story, so moving on. Sometime in the middle of the term, the vice principal, VP of our school was changed due to the aforementioned public backlash from the bullying scandals. The previous VP was a decent man, but the new VP was not. He came with a well-earned reputation of being unnecessarily harsh, dishing out suspensions and expulsions like candy on Halloween. The last straw. A few weeks after the new VP came in, and I'm having an incredibly itty week that is really battering my mind. Yes, the bullying and sexual abuse was still going on. Now, every Friday night, a group of kids used to climb through a window into the computer lab and play video games. The windows had bars on them, but a slim person could fit through. I am not slim by any definition, unless the definition is fat. Among this group of kids was this troublemaker dude in my class and my dorm with the same common name. Turns out, the VP had confused the two of us, and I was the one who was in his crosshairs. That Friday, the kids were caught. Some of them, including my namesake, managed to escape. The VP was called in, and the students who were caught snitched. Security was sent to the dorms to bring the other culprits. Cue me being woken up at 3 AM in the morning and dragged to the scene of the crime to endure a beating for something I hadn't done. Corporal punishment was tacitly legal then. Now, my explanation that there is clearly no way for me to fit through the window were met with more canings. What really pissed me off was that the VP had us bring our belongings to his office at night for an inspection with the excuse of searching for stolen computer equipment. He came across my very private journal, and like the dong he was, he proceeded to ridicule me for having a diary in front of the teachers, watchmen, and the students I was bundled with. It didn't help matters that I broke down and cried in front of them. I don't think I have ever felt such humiliation in my life before. The following morning, we were suspended for 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, my parents took me back to school. I had only told them of the mistaken identity that I suspected and the wrongful accusation. They already knew about the bullying. I didn't tell them about the VP going through my diary or the Excel stuff. I was still writhing in humiliation. The VP, being the absolute bunghole that he was, had convinced himself that I was the ringleader of this group of boys again, mistaken identity, and thus deserved extra punishment. He ordered me to clear out a large patch of weeds and overgrown grass between the rugby pitch and the hockey field, about the size of a football field, using only a slasher. Just as I'm about to head out, it starts raining and it's the middle of July. So much cold, temperatures regularly dip to below 10 degrees Celsius at night. So, instead of going to the field, I head to class to wait out the rain. A few minutes later, the VP barged in furious, interrupting the geography lesson. He proceeded to tear me a new one, even mentioning my private journal, and then he threatened to expel me if I left the field before I finished my punishment. Mind you, this was one of the best schools in our region. It had actually been my first choice. He proceeded to cane me again just to make his point stick. At this point I just broke. All of this punishment was due to something that I had not done. I was completely innocent, but this swipe just couldn't listen. The ridicule, the humiliation, the bullying, and the abuse all just came to a head at that point, and I decided to just frick it all to hell. So I walked out into the rain, slasher in hand, with not even a sweater. This was about 4 in the afternoon. I never returned. I think the VP never really expected me to complete the punishment. But then, I doubt he had ever met someone who decided they had no more fricks left to give either. My initial plan was to crucify him with his own words. Dusk fell with me cold and drenched, ripping up ferns from the ground. By midnight, I was shivering and crying uncontrollably and it was too dark to see it. I still persevered and started blindly cutting the grass, driven by this mad desire to just hurt. I really didn't care who I hurt. Sure, a part of my motivation was that if I did get sick out here, the VP would be in a frickload of trouble. But there was another part of me that was just like, frick it, life sucks anyways. By midnight, I was too cold to continue. I ran out of energy and just sat down under a tree. Towards dawn I was so cold from the rain and the wind that my shivers began reducing. It was impossible for me to sleep. The teachers finally found me there a couple of hours after dawn. Apparently, the teacher on duty had found my desk empty during morning study time between 4:30 and 6 AM. When he asked where I was, it came about that I had not been in bed the previous night either. He then called the VP and other teachers who began searching the school and they finally found me in the field. The ProRevenge, yay. It's finally here. I don't know much about what happened immediately after. I was so out of it. I do remember the teachers rushed me to the school nurse, who immediately recommended I be taken to the hospital. I spent a week there due to complications, pneumonia, and a very expensive week it was, all on the school's dime. My parents were pissed as frick, and I couldn't blame them. The school's board of governors convened after my parents contacted them. The days before my parents and I were called in to speak before the board, I had the idea to just face my fears and put everything out in the open. I was just done with that school and everybody there. So on that day, in front of a group of musty old men in the boardroom, I finally shed my burden. I told them everything, my only motivation being to bury the piece of it VP and my tormentors. I don't think I've ever done anything that scary before. From the mistaken identity, the suspension, the punishment in the rain, the threat to expel me if decided to seek shelter, and the crown jewel, the bullying and the actual abuse, I laid it all out. I knew that would definitely get their attention. The board called my best friend, who backed me up. The VP was in no position to win. He said they said contest with us at that moment. The VP was fired that day. A few days later, a zero tolerance policy on bullying was announced. I think the board was acutely afraid of finding themselves in the news for all the wrong reasons. They didn't want their school to be one of those schools, despite the fact that it was one of the worst. Over the holidays my friend told me that things got really serious after that. People didn't know why, but suddenly, any act of bullying was met with immediate and unconditional expulsion. As for the boys who had been terrorizing me, they were arrested. My dad went to the police with the threatening notes I had been receiving all year long. The school board supported us in this, on the condition that we, my parents and I, do not take the story to the media. I was happy with that arrangement. I had no desire to be the face of male rape victims. We had a few meetings with an investigator from the public prosecutor's office. A couple of months later, the office reached out, told us that the boys had pleaded guilty. One of them got off scot-free cause his dad was some senior army guy, corruption SMH. 3 of them got 10 years each. The last one got 18. The topping. They were all in their 4th and final year. They got arrested just as they were about to sit for their national exams to go to university. Their lives are ruined and I have absolutely no remorse for them. CEO voids a verbal agreement. Enjoy the new union. Hey all. This is a long story which spans several years, but I look back at the outcome with fondness. 25 years ago I worked 7 nights a week as a driver, subcontracted to the local newspaper to deliver bundles to stores and carriers. At 18, I was the youngest driver with his own route, having first been brought in by a family friend when I was 16 as a spare driver, then moving up. My days were at college studying Comp C or working computer repair jobs. Verbal agreement gets voided. The rural route I was offered had the greatest number of KMs with a relatively lower number of newspapers compared to other routes. I made an agreement with the manager, bought a heavy-duty cargo van which had been converted to run on propane, far cheaper back then got to work. Most other trucks would not have made a profit doing this route. After several months on the job, I was called into the office by the CEO of distribution company, who was mad that I had been getting paid more for my KMs in comparison to other in-city routes. The manager backed me up saying he had okayed the rate to balance out the longer hours with fewer bundles. The CEO yelled at the manager in front of the whole office and asked if there was a signed contract to state the agreed terms. When the manager admitted it was a verbal contract, the CEO said it then didn't count and was void. I get organized. Stuck with having to pay off the cargo van. And I really did enjoy the job itself. I kept at it. But documented everything including all negotiations, calls asking me to come early, requests to set the order of my route, times waiting at press, times entering, leaving loading bay, who was before and after me, route completion times, return home times, fuel costs, KMs driven, and press breakdowns. 6 months later I wanted to take some time off, but was refused. None of the company spares would agree to do my route since it costs them too much in time and fuel. Working 7 nights a week gets draining. I threatened to quit and the company relented, agreeing to pay the spares more, but not me. This situation made me madder than ever and I started reading. I Get Organizing. I learned of the magical difference between a dependent and an independent contractor and how a dependent contractor is granted many of the same rights as employees, like overtime and holiday pay. I knew this was a temporary job for me, but I was pissed enough to devote a large amount of my time to make the owner pay. I filed a comprehensive personal employment standards complaint using all those records I had been keeping, plus I offered my records to around 10 other drivers who followed my lead into filing their own complaints. A key part of my records was proving how much control the company had on how we performed our jobs. Talk of unionizing was always in the background, but it was at this point I joined the cause with a fervor. We attracted one of the country's largest unions who devoted a fair amount of resources to backing us even before they were voted in. My records went to the union who referred to them consistently. Because I had years of spare experience, I also had in-depth knowledge of many of the other routes and the lopsided pay. I helped convince several of the other drivers to join up, including some of the spares. Forming a union is a long process, so be aware there were multiple votes interspersed with the events below, with each vote favoring the union position. There were also several other enthusiastic organizers who were tired of how things were. The company fights back. The company played hardball and went after us on multiple fronts. A number of union-friendly spares were fired. Drivers lost their routes due to strategic amalgamations, and I was let go under the excuse that I had less seniority than the CEO's son-in-law who had worked as a spare a couple of times over the last few years. My own departure didn't last long. The newspaper itself demanded I be put back on my route following major problems and delays from the son-in-law doing it, bad drops, loads of complaints by carriers and customers. The union filed complaints to the labor board calling it obvious union busting. I filed a complaint to the Employment Standards Tribunal which had been set up for my personal case. Since the company had played the seniority card, It was determined I had greater seniority than a number of company men given I had worked as a spare since I was 16. The labor board said I should be given the opportunity to bump any of those with less seniority and take their route. Both the company and union asked me not to pursue this if I agreed to an immediate increase to my current route and to be paid for all days missed. I agreed, smiley face. Negotiations pay off. Now 2 years later from the start of my story, negotiations were still ongoing, but several interim agreements had been reached. A universal pay algorithm was agreed on, with drivers receiving back pay to when the negotiations started. I received one of the biggest checks. One thing I did not agree to was to let the union negotiate away my employment standards complaint. I was the lone holdout here, so as such I had equal standing in some labor board tribunals with CEO and union negotiators. I will always relish the disdain the CEO had for me at those meetings, to the point of placing his briefcase on the negotiating table to block my view of him, and me reclining back ever so slowly in those nice comfy chairs to grin at him while offering water. The Employment Standards Tribunal determined I was a dependent contractor. They awarded me everything I had asked for and more, including penalties and interest. They made a point to mention how egregiously the company had behaved after the complaint had first been submitted. The dependent contractor determination greatly strengthened the union's position for future negotiations. I move on to my career and stake. I quit shortly afterwards since I had finished with college and was full into the tech world. It did take a couple more years for the company to finally agree to pay the full amount awarded. The CEO delayed it as long as he could. Every few months I refused lowball settlement offers. That final check with his personal signature paid off my student loans and a staked in a smiley face.